was retiring, it gave me a little bit of a pause. He was in college with my sister, my much younger sister. And I'm still working and keeping the fourth commandment, which says 6 days shalt thou labor. The service had ended. The pastor, not this pastor, not your retired pastor, but another pastor was in the lobby of the church greeting. And a little boy came up to him and said, "When I get old, I'm going to give you some money." And the pastor was kind of intrigued with that thought and said, "Well, why, son?" And the little boy looked up at him and said, "Well, my daddy says you're one of the poorest preachers we've ever had around here." So, be careful what you say in the lobby. Pray with me if you would. So far, Lord, we've done a lot of things here today. We've done a lot of talking. We've done some singing. But mostly we've been talking. Now it's our turn to listen. And Lord, I just pray that this poor preacher will not get in the way and that we'll be able to hear your voice as you speak to us today. And, Lord, a Roman centurion, I think, said it best almost 2,000 years ago, and if you'll let me, I'd just like to just paraphrase his words when he said, well, we're all here in the presence of God to listen to everything that the Lord has commanded you to tell us. And that is our desire today, Lord, and I just pray that you'll give us ears so we can hear. I don't know if I should really confess this, but I'm going to risk it and tell you about a fantasy of mine that I've had for many years. And I suppose it all started back in the 80s when our family was living in Southern California in a big Bluebird Wonder Lodge and traveling around doing evangelism. My fantasy has been that at some point in the future, I would again get a big motorhome. I mean, that one was only 35 feet, and it got a little small after 2 years with 4 people, including 2 children. I can tell you that, living in it full time. So I would want, what's the biggest you can have? 45? Can you have 45? Anyways, whatever it is, the biggest bus with the expansion things and so forth. And so my fantasy is that I would have this big bus, and we'd be traveling around the country, and we'd head out to the East Coast, and we'd be there in time for the U.S. Open. I'm an avid tennis player. And my fantasy would be that at the U.S. Open, I would have friends come in, like Bob and Connie, and they would come in, and they would fly in and join us there, and we would just hang out on the grounds of the U.S. Open for the whole week, watching the tennis players, and I would just imagine that I can actually hit the ball just like, Roger Federer, or, and it's just incredible to see those guys hit the ball. I mean, it's phenomenal. I watch it on television quite regularly, and then I go out on the court at the Boise Racquet Club, and I don't even come close to approximating it. And then we'd leave the U.S. Open when it's finished, and the bus would make its way across the southern part of the United States, and we would stop at all of the most fantastic golf courses in the world. Because I like to play golf. So we'd go to Callaway Gardens. We'd go to this course. We'd go to where the Masters is playing, Augusta National. I walked out on those grounds one day. I never did it with a golf club, but I just walked out on the grounds of Augusta National. It was positively amazing. And so we would play golf, and as we make our way across the southern part of the United States again, we'd have friends and we'd have family that would join us. And the reason I say join us is I don't care how much you love them, a 45-foot bus is still too small for a bunch of people. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So they just fly in. And then when we get to Dallas, oh Dick, you're going to love this. We would go to Cowboy Stadium, And just to torment my good friend Dick Torrey, who is a Green Bay Packer fan and hates the Cowboys, I would have him fly in on a special jet, and he would go with me to Cowboys Stadium, and we would watch a football game, and the Dallas Cowboys would actually win. Fantastic. I mean, it wouldn't even be close. From the first quarter, they would be ahead. And it would never even, it would just be, I would be able to relax the whole game. It would just be absolutely wonderful. No, it's not going to happen, huh? And I would watch that big LCD screen and see the replays of the wonderful plays, etc., etc., etc. Now, I would probably like to conclude that trip across the country with my grandkids at Disneyland. And I would, I can't think of anything that would probably be more fun than taking my grandchildren to Disneyland, although I think I need to do it one at a time. I don't think I can keep up with all of them. I have 6 now. And recently 3 of them were in town, and what I did is I took one to breakfast each morning and just focused on that one grandchild. And I tell you, that was a special experience here just recently. So that's kind of my fantasy. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Except for the Cowboys.
Now, some of you ladies say, you've missed me entirely. I can't identify with any of that golf and tennis stuff and so forth. Well, I don't know, ladies. What would you like? What's your fantasy? Maybe it's to take a shopping trip around the world, hit every Nordstrom store that you could imagine, and you've got this gift card that is loaded with thousands of dollars of credit you've got to spend. Would that be kind of fun? You would enjoy that, wouldn't you? Yeah. I thought that would kind of tickle your fantasy. It has never been my fantasy, not even in my wildest dreams, to be in jail. The last time I was in jail, and I say the last time because I've been in jail several times. I have. As a visitor. The last time I was in jail, it was at the Ada County Jail. And I still remember the uneasy feeling of every time another door slammed shut behind me and I got deeper and deeper and deeper in there, and then had to talk through the little glass to my friend who was on the other side. And I was glad I could leave. It has never been my fantasy to be in prison. How about you? So imagine my surprise when I'm just minding my own business, not trying to cause trouble for anybody, reading through my Bible every morning like I've done for decades, and I get to the book of Philippians. Paul's joy letter, written from prison. How do you compute that? Paul's joy letter, written from prison. Now let's see if you can even find it. By the time you get to Philippians, you've practically read through the Bible, right? I mean, you're coming in on the home stretch here. There's not very many pages left. But I want to invite you to turn to the book of Philippians with me. Paul's joy letter. Scholars tell us that it was written about 61 to 62 A.D., Wayne. 61 to 62 A.D. Now put that in some historical context. Let's see. Nero, Emperor of Rome, 64 to 68 A.D. Nero, Domitian, Diocletian. I still remember those emperors of Rome that I memorized when I was back in school. So we're in a stretch here that gets pretty serious as far as Rome is concerned. Destruction of Jerusalem, 70 A.D. Okay? All kinds of problems building up to the destruction of Jerusalem. I mean, to say there was some tension between the Romans and the Jews would be an understatement at that point, wouldn't it? And so here's Paul writing under house arrest from Rome, his, may I say it again? Joy letter. Now some people will say, well, he was under house arrest. That wasn't too bad. Well, there's something that I noticed 4 times in the first chapter. Would you look at verse number 7 and tell me a little 5-letter word that starts with a C? It's the word chains. How does that appeal to you? You ever really wanted to be in chains? Or look down in verse number 13. I am in what? Chains. Verse number 14. Because of my chains. Let's see. How does that sound to you? Over and over again in this first chapter, I hear him making reference to chains. Now, how many of you remember seeing on the news the pictures of the serviceman in Mexico who had tried to take a weapon across the border and got detained, and he was kept in a Mexican prison until just a few weeks ago? Did you see him chained to his bed? Did you see those pictures? Maybe only if you watch Fox News. I don't know. But it was on the news. Chained to his bed. And so I ask you, how in the world could anyone write a joy letter from prison in chains? Is this a mistake? Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. Paul's joy letter. And I looked closely and I discovered that Paul uses the word joy or rejoicing 14 times in my New International Version in the book of Philippians. Joy and rejoicing 14 times. Look at it in chapter 1. Look at it. Chapter 1, verse number 4. You see that? And all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with what? Joy. Do you see that? And then look down at verse number 18. And because of this, I rejoice. Next part of verse 18. Yes, I will continue to rejoice. Verse number 25. Joy in the faith. Verse number 26. So that through me being with you again, your joy in Christ, You see the occurrence of the word joy. Joy and rejoicing is used 14 times in this little short book of 4 chapters. And then I remember, well, guess who he's writing to? To the saints in where? Philippians, that's a big clue. Philippi. To the saints in Philippi. Let's see. Philippi. What story do I remember about Paul's earlier visit to Philippi? This guy has a habit of getting in jail. Don't you remember? It was in Philippi that he and Silas were stripped and beaten, flogged, and put in jail. And what were they doing about midnight? Moaning and complaining about their terrible plight and how awful God was? They were singing and praising God. When there was an earthquake and the jail door opened, and you remember the story of the Philippian jailer who thought everybody that escaped was going to kill himself, and he was converted and his whole family were baptized. And, do you remember that? So this letter is addressed to the saints in Philippi. Interesting. How in the world, Paul, could you be singing and praising God either in a jail in Philippi or in a jail in Rome? I don't get it. It doesn't sound like a spa day to me. Or a trip to the U.S. Open. Or to Disneyland. What is going on? Well, you may think, Paul, you're living in a fantasy world. But I've been reading this little book of Philippians over and over and over again recently. And there are 2 things that really jump out at me as we are all gathered here in the presence of God that the Lord has commanded me to tell you. Two things. You've heard of Michael J. Fox. Back to the Future fame. His book is entitled My Bright Mornings. Or I guess this article is entitled My Bright Mornings, from his book, Always Looking Up. This morning my wife Tracy is already up, dealing out breakfast and readying the kids for school. I blindly fumble a plastic vial from the nightstand, dry swallow a couple of pills, and then fall immediately into the first series of actions that, while largely automatic, demand a practical determination. I swing my legs around to the side of the bed, and the instant my feet hit the floor, the two of them are in an argument. A condition called dystonia, a regular complement to Parkinson's disease, cramps my feet severely and curls them inward, pressing my ankles toward the floor and my soles toward each other, as though they were about to close in prayer. I snake my right foot out toward the edge of the rug and toe hook one of my hard leather loafers. I force my foot into the shoe, repeat the process with the left, and then cautiously stand up, chastened by the unyielding confines of the leather. My feet begin to behave themselves. The spasms have stopped, but the aching will persist for the next 20 minutes or so. First stop, bathroom. Grasping the toothpaste is nothing compared with the effort it takes to coordinate the two-handed task of wrangling the toothbrush and strangling out a line of paste onto the bristles. With no on-off switch, topping means seizing my right wrist with my left hand and forcing it down to the sink basin and shaking my brush loose as though disarming a knife-wielding attacker. A bench in the shower takes the pressure off my feet, and the steady drumbeat of the water on my back has a therapeutic effect. Getting dressed is made easier by the pills, which have begun to assert their influence. I avoid clothing with too many buttons or laces. Skipping to the conclusion of this, at the turn from our bedroom into the hallway, there is an old full-length mirror in a wooden frame. I can't help but catch a glimpse of myself as I pass. Turning fully toward the glass, I consider what I see. This reflected version of myself, wet, shaking, rumpled, pinched, and slightly stooped, would be alarming. Were it not for the self-satisfied expression pasted across my face. I would ask the obvious question, what are you smiling about? But I already know the answer. It just gets better from here. All I can say is, wow. That is a PMA if I've ever heard it, right? Talk about positive, mental attitude. Wow. Now you're just kind of letting that soak in. I want to hit you with this. I hold in my hand something that I would not be able to possess if it weren't for my good friend Victoria. I saw this circulating on the internet recently, and I went to the library and I said, I need to find the original reference on this before I can quote it, because I can't hardly believe it's true. The library was unable to help me. But since it was connected to the Navy and the Department of Navy, and Dick has connections there, he was able to secure this copy for me. And it is entitled Reflections on Pearl Harbor. And all I would simply ask you to think about is, how would you have liked to have been the person that was assigned by President Roosevelt to go and take charge of the Pacific Fleet after Pearl Harbor? You're the general. You're the admiral. Admiral Nimitz, and if you've been around San Diego like I have, you know that name, was the general that was given that assignment, who stepped out of his airplane on December 25, 1941, a Thursday, at Pearl Harbor with the responsibility of taking charge. A harbor that was covered with debris and grimy oil from sunken ships, plus the knowledge that thousands of dead men still lay beneath the waters. That was what he faced. And I'd like to quote a few of his reflections that are recorded in this document. As he recalled on his 80th birthday in 1965 what it was like on that day in 1941, December 25. Quoting, "From the time that the Japanese dropped those bombs on December 7th until at least 2 months later, there was hardly a day that passed the situation did not get more chaotic and confused and appear more hopeless." And then here comes the shocking statement that I hadn't heard about until just recently. And I'm still quoting. "Several errors were made by the Japanese on December 7, 1941. And these helped very materially to shorten the war. Their failure to come back a second day to destroy our repair facilities at the Navy Yard and to burn our 4.5 million barrels of fuel oil in surface tanks was a most serious error." He's talking about on their part. "These tanks could have been destroyed by machine gunning them with 50 caliber incendiary machine gun bullets. But they left it. Likewise, the Japanese made an even more serious error on December 7th by leaving our submarine base on Quarry Point free from attack. As a consequence, no submarines or supporting equipment were damaged, and submarines could proceed immediately to stations in the far western Pacific and start their long campaign of destruction of the Japanese merchant marine, which was a primary factor in the defeat of Japan. And there was another cause of rejoicing." Oh! Did you catch that word? He uses the same word that Paul used. There was another cause of rejoicing in the fact that the Japanese had made the attack on our fleet while it was inside Pearl Harbor. Well, what's so happy about that? And he goes on to explain. Two things. If the fleet had been outside of Pearl Harbor, we'd have lost 20,000 men instead of 3,000. And secondly, the repair of the ships would have been impossible. They'd have been out at sea. They'd have just all gone down. We couldn't have repaired them. We wouldn't have had any fleet to even repair. It had been clear out there at sea. And then he goes on to conclude this statement. He says, "By this time, you will agree that the good Lord was looking out for us, although it didn't seem so at the time." Boy, there's an understatement. Would you say amen to that?
Amen.
Woo! What do you hear through both of these little illustrations? I hear, first of all, a very positive mental attitude. Positive mental attitude in tough times. You cannot argue that Michael J. Fox is facing tough times. He's got a positive mental attitude. You cannot argue with the fact that Admiral Nimitz, when he took command of the Pacific Fleet on December 25, 1941, was facing a tough assignment. And he had a positive mental attitude. And guess what? I find that same thing through the Apostle Paul in the book of Philippians. You know, when you look at chapter 4 of the book of Philippians, if you look at particularly verses 8 and 9, notice what he stresses here. And I don't think it's any coincidence that my dad has been dead now for a number of years. But I still recall this was his favorite text. And when I was growing up as a kid, I would hear this text from him again and again and again and not him. You know, Knew this text from before I could almost speak the English language. Finally, brethren, whatever's true, whatever's noble, whatever's right, whatever's pure, whatever's lovely, whatever's admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things.
Amen.
What are you feeding your mind with? What's going into your brain? How much of it is being filled with the latest big news from American Idol or The Bachelor or whatever? I mean, is that what you're focusing on? Not that there's anything wrong with that in and of itself, but what are you putting in here? Paul says over and over again that there is a battle going on for the mind. There are two sides contending for you. And whichever side gets control of your brain, your mind gets control of you. And the thing that I noticed first of all about Paul and about Nicholas and about Michael J. Fox is positive thinking, discipline of the mind. In fact, I'd like to have you notice one other thing. And this is the second point beyond the positive mental attitude. Would you notice in verses 18 and 27 of Philippians 1 some very curious words? Paul, writing from prison, says in verse 18, "But what does it matter? The important thing, ... And then look down at verse number 27. First two words in the NIV, whatever happens. The important thing, what does it matter? Whatever happens. Now, as you're thinking about that, I'd like to make this just observation that I've come to from studying Philippians. I'm convinced that the reason that Paul is able to rejoice in tough times is that he has discovered that happiness depends upon happenings and it comes and goes. If the Cowboys win or if they don't win, happiness can come and go in a moment. But Christians' joy and rejoicing is something else entirely. A Christian's joy is not dependent upon external circumstances. Or else he could never be doing this from prison. Now let's make this really practical. What am I really saying and how can it work for you? What does it matter? The important thing, whatever happens. Lord, what are you saying to me today? I'd like to hear something from the Lord. At least I believe that I've been hearing something from the Lord. Again, that starts with the letter P, and it's the word perspective. What does it matter? The important thing, whatever happens. A number of weeks ago, I was over at a friend's house, and she, knowing my proclivity to sweets, gave me this ice cream bar, tantalizing me with the good news that it had only 150 calories, that I could eat it unashamed and just enjoy it. She told me that she had just gotten them on special at Albertsons for whatever it was, $3.70 for a package of 6. They were on clearance. I ate it, enjoyed it, and on the way home I stopped at Albertsons. I found the very package that she was describing. My heart dropped a little bit as I noticed the price.
$8.
Darn, she got a good deal and I'm not going to. I went to the checkout stand and the clerk rang up the package of ice cream bars. And lo and behold, I got the same deal. I saved $1.72. And I was happy. It was good. But now just imagine that we were at the closing table at the title company and I was your realtor and we were buying a house and the house was priced at $300,000 and I tell you, guess what? I have found in the closing statement a way to save you $1.72. Hold everything. Don't sign the papers. We're going to ask the title company to redraw the docs. You know, we're going to go through all this because we can save you $1.72. What would you think?
You're crazy.
You would say, Jerry, you've lost your mind. Get some perspective here. Get some perspective. My little daughter, when we were traveling around the country in Southern California in the motorhome, she knew how I did not like it. Whenever I went around the corner and I could hear plates and things falling out of the cupboards or, the noise of something happening back there. And so her favorite thing to do, she was 13 at the time, she would come to the front and she'd say, Daddy, no catastrophe, no catastrophe. That was her system for trying to calm me down. And she really needed that one day because I shouldn't admit this, but it's really true. I looked in the camera and guess what I saw? I was out on the 91 freeway in Riverside and I saw my son waving to me from the ladder on the back. I had forgotten that he was on the top of the bus.
Was you going like 70 miles an hour?
So I think she probably said, no catastrophe. But my point is simply this. Folks, we need to grow up and get a little perspective. Paul had some perspective. That's why he said, what does it matter? The important thing, whatever happens, what I hear through those three phrases are perspective. He's not losing his life over $1.72. He's got a picture of what's really important. And what was Paul's perspective? What did he think was important? Let's check it out. Chapter 1, verse number 17. The former preached Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely supposing that they could stir up trouble for me while I am in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is, what is it? What is it? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice. Whoa. Verse 20. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or death. Chapter 3, verse number 7. But whatever was to my profit, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything lost compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I've lost all things. I consider them rubbish, that I may gain Christ and be found in Him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness that comes from God and is by faith. I want to know Christ and the power of His resurrection and the fellowship of sharing in His sufferings, becoming like Him in His death, and so somehow to attain to the resurrection from the dead. Verse 13. But one thing I do, forgetting what's behind and straining toward what is ahead.